Hey everybody, it's Tony Contespati with GreatVocalMajority.com and the Great Vocal Majority Podcast. Today, I want to talk about understanding unemployment. You know, the Bureau of Labor Statistics last week came out with their employment situation summary for the month of August. Had a very low unemployment rate in it, and a lot of people seem to be encouraged by that. But I want to go in and poke at that 5.1% unemployment number to show you how I don't think it's really relevant as a measure anymore. I don't think that numbers are being gamed or anything like that. I just think that that particular measure of unemployment has sort of outlived its usefulness because the economy has changed from the way it's been in the past. But anyway, I want to go through a few charts here, show you some analysis to try to educate you to how you can look at this and why I believe it's really no longer a valid measure. So we're going to start with some basics. And the first thing is how does the Bureau of Labor Statistics collect information? Well, I'm not going to get so much into the how as to the what. What do they actually collect? They collect three basic pieces of information discretely from the surveys that they do. The first thing they collect are the number of people employed. And employed could mean as little as 1 hour a week or a month. I forget exactly how they measure it, but it's a very little. It's like the minimum amount of work people might be doing, and they're still considered to be employed. So that's one measure. The second measure is unemployed, obviously, and unemployed is a little tricky in how it's defined, and I'll explain that in a minute. The third piece that they measure is not in the workforce, and this is what I was getting at a second ago. You know, when you look at unemployed and not in the workforce, you might ask yourself, you might say to me, hey Tony, aren't those the same thing? Well, in a way they are, but this is how it's different for the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Unemployed, in terms of the Bureau of Labor Statistics reporting, means people who are out of work but are looking for work. But not in the workforce means people are unemployed, they're out of work, but for whatever reason they're not looking for work. Now they may have given up looking, they may have quit looking temporarily, whatever the situation is, they're not looking for work. They're able to work. If work was available, they'd work, but they're not looking. They're not actively seeking employment. And from these three pieces of information, the Bureau of Labor Statistics also can tell you what the total workforce is. Now, how do you define the total workforce? Well, it's really easy. It's the employed and the unemployed. Now, that may seem a little counterintuitive because you say workforce, you're thinking of people working. But the way the Bureau of Labor Statistics looks at it, they're saying, look, the people who are in the workforce are the people who are working and the people who want to work and are looking for work. And that's why they measure it this way. Now, from here, there's one more thing that finishes off this left column here of the basics. That's the adult population. And what is the adult population? Very simple. It's just the people in the workforce plus the people not in the workforce. And that's your adult population. Now, based on these five components, the BLS publishes all kinds of statistics. They do cuts by demographics, by race, by age, by gender. I mean, they do all kinds of demographics on this, and there's probably 80% of the information that the Bureau of Labor Statistics publishes in terms of employment, unemployment, and any of the combinations thereof is just based on all of these five pieces. But the two things that you hear about most often in the news are the unemployment rate, which I call U3. Actually, it's the Bureau of Labor Statistics calling it U3 because they have 6 measures of unemployment, and this is just one of them. It's the one that's considered the official unemployment rate. And that's what I'm really getting at. Should it really still be considered the official unemployment rate? Because as you'll see in a minute, the economy's changed enough to where that number really tends to understate the true unemployment problem. I mean, just to give you an idea, during all 8 years of President Bush's term in office, George W. Bush, the previous president, the unemployment rate average for all 8 years was 5.3%. Now, until the very end, the economy was okay. I mean, I wouldn't say it was great during Bush, but it was okay. I mean, we did have several events like 9/11, Hurricane Katrina. And we started with a recession to begin with, but the unemployment rate was rather low, and there really weren't a lot of people out of work. But now we have an unemployment rate of 5.1%, and it just doesn't feel the same as it did when President Bush was in office. So it makes you think something's different. And so we're looking at this analysis today to try to isolate, well, what has changed? And that brings me to the next measurement, the workforce participation rate, which right now is 62.6%. Now, the workforce participation rate is the total number of people in the workforce divided by the adult population. And 62.6% means that that rate is the lowest it has been in nearly 40 years. So that's a long time. Now, a lot of people will argue, well, we expect the workforce participation rate to decline because the population is aging, and as Americans get older, a larger percentage of the people are retired, so therefore we should have a declining participation rate. This is true. However, when Barack Obama entered office, the 20 years previous to when he entered in 2009, from 1989 to 2009, the workforce participation rate varied for a 20-year period within just 1.5 percentage points. So it did begin declining prior to Obama's entry into office. The problem is, once Obama entered into office, the decline accelerated 3 times as fast as what had been happening. And it's never restored itself. It's never kind of right-sized itself back to where it should have been. You know, it's reasonable to say that the workforce participation rate should be lower than it was when Obama entered office, but not as low as it is. That's what we're getting at. So let's get into this a little bit. We're going to do some basic analysis. And the analysis that we're going to do is we're just going to ask a simple question. What would the U3 unemployment rate be if the workforce participation rate didn't change since Obama's been in office? And I'll show you how analysts do this calculation. So the first thing we're going to do, let's level set everything and look at what the workforce participation rate was in February of 2009, which I think we've already mentioned, or excuse me, we didn't mention in 2009, 65.8%. That's where it was in 2009. What we did mention was where it is now in 2015. It's at 62.6%. So you could see that's a 3.2% decline in the workforce participation rate. And now you're probably asking yourself, is 3.2% a lot? Well, like I said a minute ago, yeah, it is a lot compared to the way we had been declining prior to Obama's entry into office. Now, this isn't so much a knock on Obama, but it did happen while he was in office, and little has been done to reverse it. So let's assume one thing, though, before we go through this analysis, and that is the reported numbers, whatever the BLS actually reported for the adult population and the total number of people employed, will not be changed in this exercise. And the reason why we do that, it's a standard practice among variance among analysts that do variance analysis, because whenever you are trying to isolate the effect of a change of a variable in a process that has numerous variables, what you try to do is you try to hold as many of the variables flat, static, keep them fixed, and just change the one variable and see how that changes the overall result. And that way you can see how much of the change is attributable to that one variable. And that's what we're about to do. So we look at the number of people employed. That was reported 149,036,000. Next, we look at the number of people in the adult population, which was also as reported. This is part of our assumptions. That's 251,096,000. Next, we can calculate what the workforce number should be, because we are assuming in this exercise that the workforce participation rate hasn't changed since February 2009, which was incidentally Obama's first full month in office. That's why I'm using that particular date. So if we use 65.8% and multiply it by 251,096,000, which is the number of people in the population, we can see that the workforce would be here, 165,221,000. Next, because we know the workforce number and we have the number of people employed, we can back into the unemployed number. And we could say that's 16,185,000. And similarly, since we have the total number of people in the population and the workforce number, now we can calculate what the people not in the workforce would be. So this is what analysts do. And now that we have those 5 components, we can calculate what the unemployment rate would be had the workforce participation rate never changed. And that's the number, 9.8%. In other words, if the workforce participation rate behaved as it did pretty much for the previous 20 years prior to Obama's entry into office during the recession, that would be the unemployment rate. What you see right there, 9.8%, nearly double what we have now. That tells me, and that should tell you, that something really changed dramatically during the recession. A lot of people left the workforce and have never returned. And that's a big problem. So you might see on the news or hear on the radio, commentators talk about how there are 94 million Americans who are not working. That is a true statement. 94 million Americans are not working. Now, how many of that 94 million actually want to work but just have given up looking? That's a very good question, and we can estimate that with some degree of certainty, not extreme precision, but with some degree of certainty. But I will tell you this, it's not, as some commentators try to imply, that the answer is 94 million. It is not. There is not 94 million Americans who are really anxious to get back to work in that not in the workforce number. But if you look at the difference, we have 94 million people out of not in the workforce now, and we have 85, almost 86 million here. That would tell you that the difference between, let's say, 86 and 94 is 8 million people. I would say probably about 2/3 of those people, in other words, about 6 to 7 million, are really people who are out of the workforce that just gave up looking for work. Now, it could be the entire amount. It could be 8 million. But I think that number is probably closer to 6 or 7. But in any event, in other words, what I'm saying is the unemployment rate, 5.1%, going back to where we started here, 5.1% does not fairly depict what the true unemployment rate is in the economy right now, particularly because that measure of unemployment does not account for people who have left the workforce because they've been discouraged. And that's a big problem. But I wanted to bring it to your attention, and I wanted to show you how you can do this calculation yourself. I mean, every time the Bureau of Labor Statistics comes out with their report, you can do an analysis like this because all the numbers are in that report. All you need is a calculator and 5 numbers, and you can figure it out for yourself. I hope this was helpful. I hope you learned something. This is Tony Codispoti from Great Vocal Majority. Take care, guys.